Welcome to the Bregman Leadership Podcast. I am Peter Bregman, and we have a special treat today on a number of levels. First of all, I've never done an in-person podcast before, and this is my first in-person podcast. Second of all, we have a treat because the first in-person podcast is with my brother, Bertie Bregman, Dr. Bertie Bregman. Bertie, welcome to the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
And Bertie's an interesting guest on a number of different levels because he's a physician. He has started his own physician's practice. He started a number of offices around the city, and he's now also started a internet startup business related to the practice. And so I think there's a lot of interesting stories around leadership and around kind of building a business and entrepreneurialism that we'll get in our conversation today. So anyway, dude, thank you for being here.
I hope your viewers can tell the difference between us.
Yeah, I sometimes wear clothes just like that. So here's what I want to do is I want to start with the beginning, really, right? Which is, you became, in fact, let's even start earlier than the beginning of you being a doctor, which is you went to college, you majored in history, you, after college, decided, oh, I might as well start to do my pre-med after college, and you decided to be a doctor. Why did you make that decision?
Well, I was never really science-oriented as a kid or in college. I was much more interested in liberal arts, and I majored in history. I had a mentor in college named Gloria Emerson, who was a famous journalist for the New York Times, and she got me interested in photography.
She told me I was a terrible writer.
It's probably true.
And maybe back then.
Yeah, I think you've improved. So she was a big influence and a mentor, and she got me a job at Magnum Photos as a photo researcher after college, and I did that sort of photojournalism thing for a while, and then realized that I wanted a little bit more intellectual sort of challenge and stimulation. Went back and did a post-bac program at Columbia, and then I went to med school at Penn and chose family medicine. Should I keep going?
Well, I'm kind of curious I'm curious, like, emotionally, whether, like, making that decision. How old were you when you went to when you did the pre-med?
So pre-med was, I guess I was 23, 24, and then started med school at I graduated med school 26, so started med school
so
23.
It's still relatively young. I mean, you were a few years older than the people in your class, but you were
not too much older.
Right,
yeah, maybe like 3 or 4 years older.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. There were some post-bac students who were much older.
Right.
But I wasn't one of those.
Right. Okay, so you go to med school, and you make a decision to go into family practice.
Right.
Why?
I was a generalist in nature, and I like to see a lot of different things, lots of different areas. I wasn't interested in specializing in a narrow field too much.
Right.
And so for me, it sort of narrowed it down to family medicine versus emergency medicine.
Right.
And I almost went into emergency medicine. If you remember, I actually applied for residencies in emergency medicine. And what happened was I was very torn, and I looked at some of the older doctors in both professions, and I realized that the ER doctors were all pretty much burned out, whereas the family medicine doctors were very happy, having to do, I think, mostly with the fact that they had developed longitudinal relationships, sometimes over generations, with their patients. Right. And that was very, long after the technical challenge of practicing medicine wears off, the relationship endures and never becomes old. And, in emergency medicine, that relationship is very sort of fleeting and intermittent, whereas in family medicine, and it turned out to be true for me, I found that you have relationships with people that are tremendously important.
Right. It's interesting because if I'm also remembering correctly, family practice was not a big field. There weren't a lot of people going into family practice.
It's family medicine is a funny field in some ways because it's probably the most visits to a doctor in the United States, to a specialty, are to family medicine doctors, but mostly it's concentrated in the Midwest and in areas of the country, not so much the urban areas of the country.
More like town doctors.
Right, small town doctors or rural doctors or country doctors. And but there was definitely a demand and a niche to be filled, and so that's what we did with Westside Family Medicine in New York.
It's interesting. I think it was Dan Ariely who, but it was writing about how to make decisions, that generally we are very bad at making decisions, at projecting how we will feel about something in the future. Like if you say, how will I feel winning the lottery, you're going to say you love it. You talk to people who won the lottery, in the end, they're not so happy. I mean, still, we would like to win the lottery, but that's, sort of if you project how you're going to feel about an experience, you're not very good. But the way to actually accurately predict how you'll feel is to look at people who've made that decision and see how they feel.
That's interesting. Well, then I really lucked out, because that was
that's what you did. That was your instinct, right?
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing is I like the other people in family medicine, and I think that I often tell medical students that you're going to be spending your life around these people that are in your field, and different types of personalities tend to gravitate toward different fields.
Right.
So if
surgeons,
worst to the worst,
surgeons
have a personality. So if worst to the worst, you end up in a field where you like the people there, whatever happens, you won't be that unhappy.
Right. That's a good way of thinking about it. I remember actually also that if you remember, I was thinking about becoming a lawyer at a certain point. And part of the decision of mine not becoming a lawyer is I worked for a summer in a law firm, small law firm in New Jersey, and every single one of the partners was having an affair. And I thought, and I also looked and I projected, and I was like, this is not how I want to grow old. Like, this is not what I want my life to be. Okay, so you went to medical school, you chose family practice, and then you became director of family practice at Columbia?
Well, I met my wife during my internship, and Rachel was a medical student doing a rotation at my hospital. She was going to med school at Dartmouth, and I was training in New York, and so we met there. Right. And so when I graduated in family medicine, she was still at family medicine. She ended up going into family medicine as well. Right. And she was still in training, and so I took a job at Columbia as director of the inpatient service. So I was like a hospitalist, which is not a very family medicine type of thing to do. But I loved it. It involved teaching, taking care of sick or hospitalized patients. Right. So the medicine was very challenging, and I ended up loving the teaching as well.
Right. Okay, so fast forward now, unless I'm going to miss something important, to when you decide to open your first practice.
So we have. So Rachel and I eventually had 5 kids, and sometime soon after the birth of our first kid, Noah, we looked around and we realized, Rachel realized that there were not really any good primary care practices in our neighborhood. And Rachel has a very entrepreneurial spirit. She's always sort of thinking about sort of the next thing to do. Right. And she had the idea that we should open a practice. So we decided that we would do that. And I went to, I guess maybe it was around that time that we went to you and we were like, we're thinking about opening a practice. What should we do? And the first thing you said was, you have to do a business plan. So Rachel and I looked at each other and said, a business plan. Yeah, we're not doing a business plan. We don't even know what a business plan is. So, then what happened? What's your memory of that?
My memory of it is actually you didn't do a business plan, but I basically said in
back of the envelope.
I was like you need a spreadsheet. You need to work out the numbers. You need to sort of see what it's going to cost and etc. Right. And I was with my family in Walt Disney World, and you were in Florida for some reason.
I do remember that. We were in a hotel room.
We were in a hotel room in the hotel in Disney World. And we talked about it, and I don't know if you remember this, but you showed me a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And we kind of looked down the spreadsheet, and the numbers looked good. Right. It looked like it was a smart thing to open up a practice.
Right. So that's what we did. Right. And the
point is, by the way, you weren't super business minded. You didn't know you weren't you didn't have this necessarily entrepreneurial. Maybe you had an entrepreneurial drive, certainly, because you do, but you didn't know much about business at that point.
Absolutely. We knew so little about business that it would be embarrassing to tell you some of the mistakes that we made in the beginning.
I think you should tell us some of the mistakes.
Well, I will say, first of all, I will say that Rachel is got a natural sort of inclination for business. She has very good business instincts, and that's probably what sort of saved us more than anything. And we were into it too. And I think that in many ways, it is not a lie to say that if we had known what we were getting into, we probably wouldn't have done it.
Well, and I was thinking about this.
So it's lucky that we didn't.
Right, and I was thinking about
research.
this as I was thinking about this conversation, because there are ways in which knowing a lot about something is really important. Like, I don't think you would argue that as a physician, as a doctor, and you're my doctor, right? So I obviously trust you. But as a doctor, I'm hoping you know a lot about diagnostics, like as a diagnostician, and you know a lot about medicine. But there are certain things that we do that we're better off being a little ignorant about, because if we know too much, we won't actually go forward. And possibly starting a business. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that I talk to who would say the same thing, which is like, had I known. In fact, I run a leadership program, and the two things people say about it most often is, had I known what these last 4 days were going to be like, I never would have come. And it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. Right. Well, and I think those two things have to go together in some ways, because unless you're going to surprise yourself and do something that you never really thought you would do beforehand, then you're probably not going to get to the other side and go, wow, that was the best thing I've ever done, because it sort of surprises you.
I mean, it's interesting you bring that up, because it makes me think, well, then what is the difference with medicine? Because when I think about it, I mean, I would never practice medicine like that. I would never sort of treat somebody with the feeling like, well, I don't know what I'm getting myself into here, but I'm just going to go for it.
Let's just try this drug. I don't know what it does.
You want to know everything there is to know about what you're doing before. But we didn't really feel that way about medicine, about opening a practice. We sort of were kind of arrogant about it. And we kind of thought, you know what? How hard could it be? We'll hang a shingle, we'll see patients, we'll try and make sure the money that comes in is like a bigger number than the money that goes out.
But you know what?
That's what we did.
In the end, that's actually, and a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people don't do that, and their businesses die. So, if you don't know anything else, to just know we got to make, which is why you do a spreadsheet. We got to know that the money coming in is higher than the money going out.
And the other thing is,
that's already profound.
It was our money.
Right.
So I guess maybe that's one distinction with medicine too. I mean, when I'm treating someone else, that person's life or health is at stake. Right. So, I have a much lower threshold for taking risks. Right. But we felt like, what? It's our money. We can do whatever we want with it. Right. Worst to the worst, if, this ends up being a big mistake, we're not hurting anyone except for ourselves. Right. So let's just go for it. Let's take the risk.
What I wonder also is, and I'm curious about this for you, is whether you sort of have this balance,
which is not the case with Qwell, by the way, which we're going
to get to in a second. So I wonder if, in a way, medicine is sort of stable and it's interesting, but it's not risky for you in a certain sense, because you're not going to take risks with patients that you shouldn't take. So I wonder whether this balance is sort of important for you in your life, and for Rachel also, to say, we're going to spend our life in a practice doing the stuff that we know really well, and we're going to study, and we're not going to take huge risks in. And then that gives us an appetite to take risks in this other thing that, that balances out. We're going to be grounded here, and we're going to take risks over there. Do you think that plays into it at all?
It might. I don't know. I think, I personally find medicine to be hugely satisfying. I don't ever really want to stop practicing, and for many reasons that maybe would be the topic of another podcast one day. Right. It's something that I don't feel there's a whole lot missing from medicine. Right. Including, risk.
So why start a business?
Well, in this case, we didn't really have much choice.
Well, no, in terms of with the practice. Why start your practice? Why not just work in medicine? You love medicine. Why not? It's safer. It's easier. Why not just practice family medicine?
Right. Partly it's because we just saw an opportunity. Right. And so we thought, let's just take that opportunity. We were excited by the idea of bringing family medicine into an area where there really was no family medicine for a large segment of the population. For the most part, family medicine existed in New York for the underserved population in Medicaid clinics and in residency programs. Right. But, people who had insurance and who had jobs on like the sort of middle and higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum, for them, there wasn't any really good primary care, honestly, that we could see.
Right.
There really wasn't. I mean, if you had Medicaid, you got great primary care from great family practice doctors.
Right.
But if you had insurance, then where are you going to find a primary care doctor? They were very few and far between, to tell you the truth, in New York.
So there wasn't a lot of places
There were
for you
a
to
lot
get a
of
job doing it,
specialists.
actually, in some ways.
For us?
Yeah.
No, I mean, we had good jobs and
Right.
we liked our jobs, but we saw an opportunity to sort of bring the model to a whole new population.
Right.
And for us, that was very exciting because we believed in family medicine.
Right.
And it turned out to be really true. We never spent a dime. I mean, actually, we did spend about a dime on advertising. We bought, I think, a blog, and we bought like a little line of advertising in sort of a mother's blog, and for like $25, and that was all the money we ever spent on advertising.
Right. Although with you also have insurance. You take insurance, so that helps to build a business because people have insurance who are looking for.
For sure, we got a lot of patients from insurance,
Right.
a lot of patients from word of mouth,
Right.
and then eventually we got also patients from a company that did online booking.
Right. Okay, and so that brings us to this new business that you've started, called Qwell, and so you're never going to be able to argue that you don't have some element of entrepreneurial spirit, even if you're forced into doing these businesses, because you're going from business to business. But tell me, like, first of all, again, now you've got you've got 3 offices.
3 offices. Yeah.
3 offices. You've got lots of doctors who are working for you, and you guys are really good. I mean, I don't say this just because we're on a podcast. I say it because because
you're
my doctor. No, I'm not. I'm not just saying because you're my brother, but because like you're my doctor. But now you've started another business. So what happened?
So what happened was we started using an online booking system that came to us about 10 years ago. We were always very open to tech,
right?
And we started practicing right at the beginning of where people were using EMRs sort of on a regular basis.
EMR?
Electronic medical records.
Okay.
A lot of people were still writing on paper. Medicine was one of the last industries to switch over to computerization and did a very bad job of it in many ways.
Right.
But we were always very tech forward, and we liked the idea of having a paperless office and using an electronic medical record, and we were always early adopters of systems we thought would help us, but we were discriminating as to what we wanted to start to use. We were wary, I think, as most doctors are, of adopting systems that were just going to add to our administrative burden, which was already big enough, as it is for all doctors and especially primary care doctors.
Right.
So, but this system of online booking seemed pretty good, so we signed up for it. It was free at first, and then like all free things, so many free things, eventually we ended up having to pay for it.
Right.
But we grew with them over the last 10 years and into a sizable practice where now, we had 1 office, 2 offices, 3, 4. So we have 4 offices. 2 of them are in the same site. That's really, but we open them every couple of years. We open an office, and that was really just organic growth. We never sort of grew faster than we needed sort of more space.
Right.
In other words, which is very different than a lot of business models today.
Right.
So then, so we were very happy using this system, and it brought us a lot of patients, and we sort of grew along with them.
Right. And then
what happened was they had been charging a flat subscription fee, and they came to us one day and they said, we're changing our model and now we're charging per patient.
Right. So per patient, because you had a pretty big practice and you have these 4 different offices and you're getting a lot of, per patient increases your costs
10x.
10x. Okay.
10x.
Right.
So that was completely unaffordable.
Right.
But we've been with them for 10 years. We thought, well, okay, we'll just talk to them and work something out. And but it was upsetting.
Yeah.
And
I remember
we
had a bunch of conversations about it.
Conversations with you.
Yeah.
With them.
You were you know, super stressed out because you also got a lot of business from the on.
We got a
booking.
lot of patients from them,
Right.
and we didn't really think that it would ever be
And they had a monopoly.
realistic not to
Meaning they
use
really
them.
had a monopoly.
And they had a
on
monopoly,
you.
right?
Right.
They had a monopoly. There were no real other competitors in the space.
Right.
Which
So they
was
had an ability to
a
say,
surprise
okay,
to us. We
Right.
never really thought about it one way or the other.
Right.
But then when it came to this pricing move,
Right.
first thing we did was obviously look around for competitors, and
Right.
we saw that there really were none.
Right.
So the second thing we thought was, well, we'll negotiate with them. I mean, everybody negotiates.
Right.
And we spent many hours talking to you. Rachel and I really relied on you a lot for advice during this period. It was very stressful for us.
It was a very stressful period.
And, you know, you really got a front row seat to the whole thing.
Yes, I did.
And then we didn't really get very far with them over the phone.
But the stress, just to be clear about, so the stress is this major portion of your business. It's like as though for my business, if I had like 4 clients, you know, each making 25% of my business, and suddenly I'm going to lose 2 of those clients. Suddenly the potential source of income disappears because or it's going to cost you so much to maintain it that it might as well disappear.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, it was, you know, it was a very large source of sort of patient flow for us.
Right.
And to sort of suddenly lose that was not something we'd ever really considered that it would happen. So we deserve what we got because we allowed ourselves to become overly dependent on one vendor.
Right.
That turned out to be, for us, very unreliable.
Right. And by the way, you're not alone, right? This happens in business all the time.
In other areas.
Yeah, other areas.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was one lesson learned.
Right.
Don't become too reliant on one company, on one vendor.
Right.
So, but we thought, of course, we'll be able to negotiate with them. But we thought, well, maybe we should take somebody along with us who actually knows something about negotiating with, you know, big companies and with, you know, like business people. So we turned to you and we said, okay, Peter.
We went to that meeting. Yeah.
Come to that meeting with us. You know, we went to the, you know, headquarters of this company and met with all their top people, or some of their top people. And what was your memory of that meeting?
I mean, my memory was walking out. My memory was twofold. One is really listening and having conversations with them about it, and trying all these different angles of how they might be flexible in some way around, you know, the amount of time you would have for a transition, or
give
cost,
us more time,
or give more time,
give
or
us a break on
like
cost.
give us, you know, if you bring in
Phase
X
it
number,
in.
phase it in. If
Right.
you do, and it dawned on me, about halfway through the meeting, and this is so interesting because when you have these conversations, you're like, we went in there trying to figure out what's going on. What's going on? And it dawned on me about halfway through the meeting, they don't care whether you stay with them or not, because their belief is you can't live without them, or if you did, then the patients that were coming to you from them would just go to other people. So they would make money from these patients going to whoever else they're going to go to. You're the only one who stands to lose. So they're like, you can stay with us or not stay with us, but it didn't matter to them because their belief was that it wouldn't hurt their bottom line if one of their, a doctor who's seeing a ton of patients disappeared. It would be more to spread around to everybody else. And so then I realized halfway through that meeting, they're not actually interested in making any kind of deal. But I also remember walking out and saying to you, if I weren't in that meeting with you, I wouldn't have believed that that's what happened.
Yeah, you said if you had told me about that and I wasn't there, I wouldn't have believed it.
Right.
Which, coming from someone who's been to, hundreds of meetings that?
Yeah.
Thousands of meetings like that?
Right.
It's kind of interesting.
There was a level of arrogance in the, on the other side that sort of stunned me a little bit. But it in some ways is not so unusual sometimes in startup companies, but they're not really a startup anymore. I don't know. It surprised me. It really surprised me. Okay, so
but
we had that meeting, but it became what was great about it is
It was a clarifying moment.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a very clarifying moment, which actually is great, and I am very thankful that we had that moment, because that's the reality. So the sooner we get to see the reality and not fool ourselves that really there is some room for negotiation, or they'll come around, or whatever it is. I mean, they couldn't have made it more clear that we need an alternative, and we better find one soon.
Right, which is actually very interesting,
great.
Which is really helpful, which is really helpful. If they had strung it along and maybe we'll do it, and etc., you would have been in trouble.
Right, we could have just, you know,
like hoped,
kicked the can down the road.
Right.
So it was
now,
we didn't.
So you had a decision you needed to make.
Right. So we looked around for a competitor, and we're, you know, very surprised to find that there really were no competitors.
Right. Which is how a lot of businesses start, right?
Which is kind of shocking, because, I mean, everybody has a competitor.
Right.
I mean, think of all the different companies. I mean, it's hard to think of a company without lots of competitors. Right. And there are a few small ones here or there, some other alternatives that were not really, we didn't really see them as really realistically sort of likely to replace the role that company was playing for us.
Right.
Like, for instance, calendar apps that could go into your website, but for various reasons there really wasn't. So we thought to ourselves, okay, if we're going to spend that huge amount of money, you know, to pay to them, why not just develop something for ourselves?
Which actually, in a certain sense, it's interesting because it's occurring to me, because it cost you a lot to build the system that you built. And had you not been comparing it to this huge amount you would have had to pay them, it might have been much harder for you to invest the amount of money you know, like, it's basically like, okay, you're going to have to pay them. I don't know, can we say the amount? I don't know if you can say the amount. But
a lot.
But yeah, like a lot of money. And you would have to pay them that. So it sort of increased the bar of what you would be willing to invest as an alternative.
Right.
And that was actually interesting.
The second thing we have to be thankful to them for. Right? Number one, they're very clarifying as to, you know, their unwillingness to negotiate.
Right.
Number two, they were not making it possible for us to tighten our belts and continue going along with them. Right. It wasn't an option.
Right.
Which is really great.
Right.
And I really am very thankful to them for that.
But, you know,
I really appreciate that move.
Right.
Because let's say they had said, oh yeah, you know, it's true, you know, increasing your costs 10x in one day, that's just not reasonable. Why don't we spread it out over the next, you know, 24 months?
Right.
You know, maybe we would have said, I don't know if we can do that, but certainly it'll be okay for the next 6 months. So let's just like go along for 6 months and then see what happens. The next thing you know, you're being strung along.
So one of the lessons here for me is that it's really like not only, it's sort of the lobster boil, right? It's like if you're boiling a lobster really slowly, they don't notice it. So, but so you were helped by the fact that they were just, you know, they were throwing you into boiling water. They weren't slowly warming it up.
Yes.
But also the ability to really see a situation as starkly as possible allows you to make decisions that you wouldn't make otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's like you could, you know, it's almost like find a way to be thankful to a competitor or to somebody who does something to you that seems really harsh in the moment, instead of wasting your time in like revenge fantasies and anger. Like,
well,
actually,
we did waste a lot of time on that too.
But this becomes the revenge fantasy, like the, you know, success is the best revenge. Okay, so you decide you're going to invest a bunch of money in creating
our own system.
Your own system. So describe what you did.
So, well, first of all, I have to, you know, bring Rachel back into the picture. I mean, she was
critical to
every
piece of it.
What was your perspective on it?
My perspective was she was driving this.
She was driving this. She was like, you know, this is what we have to do, and you know, she really like when she sets her mind on something.
And it is amazing. Like, so this is also something about starting a business, because you've started a business incredibly quickly while you're running your other business. Right. And I think every single conversation I had with her over a period of, you know, 4 or 5 months was about this. And
still
when
is.
and still is. And when I wasn't in a conversation and I heard her talking to someone else, it was about that. So there is this like element of obsession when you're starting something that's actually really useful. Yeah. And is, you know, it's like hard to lead without that kind of
and that's definitely more her personality than my personality.
Yeah.
So I maybe have a little bit more of a naturally balanced.
But I do remember we were in Florida. We were in Florida at the same time around Passover, and I was and Eleanor, my wife, and I went down, and you guys were at the pool and you were talking to some people that you had met the year before, and you were talking about Qwell. And then Eleanor and I left, and we went to an exercise class for an hour, and then we went to the beach for an hour, and we came back, and you guys were all at the pool talking about Qwell. And I was like, that's staying power. That's, what happened is, as she talks about it and as you talk about it, you're crystallizing it, and you're figuring out holes, and you're working through problems. Like, it's not just, let me tell you about this. It's like figuring out how to make it successful.
It's
that
very
kind of
much the
is
process.
very helpful.
It's very, very much the process.
Right.
The more people you describe it to, the more questions you take about it. And people say this about pitches too, which we're finding now as we're raising money for it. The more pitches that we do, sort of the more clear the idea is in our own heads, and the more better able we are to sort of describe it to somebody else.
That's great.
So
okay, so you decide you're going to do it. You obsess over it. You have to spend a lot of money. How does it feel? Like, do you feel the risk of it? Do you feel?
Well, at one point I said to Rachel, "This is just our new office."
No, that's interesting.
Every 2 years we've been opening a new office. That costs a lot of money.
Right.
We try and do it in such a way that it's really nice, and we try and buy the real estate as opposed to renting. And so, it costs. There's a big capital outlay, and there's a big investment. There's a lot of work. And it was really we were actually looking at another office down in Chelsea.
Right.
And we were looking at it, and then this happened. And as we started doing it, we just had too much on our plate, and that kind of like fell by the wayside. And that's when I realized, I said to Rachel one day, I was like, so this is our office.
Right.
And once we put it in those terms, it became a lot easier to spend the money, because this is the amount of money we'd be spending anyway on an office. Well, actually, not as much, but still, in the basic
it's like behavioral economics, which is framing is everything. So like how you frame it, how you think about it.
Right. So that was one thing. And the other thing is like what you said before, which is that, we would much rather spend the money on this than like giving it to that other company.
Right.
So since they were asking for so much, it sort of gave us more to work with.
All right. So give us briefly what this is. Like, now we've sort of built up to it.
So we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're very happy.
Wait. You got to give me the line that you gave before.
Well, what we tell people is that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to make it rounder.
I love that. Okay, you're just trying to make
We're just trying to make it better. And I left out that was part of our process. As we talked about what we wanted to do for ourselves, it just became sort of exciting to think about ways in which we can make it better, not just for us, but for everyone.
Right.
Because we were not the only people in this situation. Rachel and I know a lot of doctors in New York.
Right.
And every single doctor that we knew who was associated with this other company felt the same way that we did about it. Right. So there was a sort of a groundswell of,
so it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity.
We thought, wow, I mean, like, we should take advantage of this. Right. And, we should sort of offer to these other doctors whatever we're thinking is going to help us. Why not sort of make it more widely available and help them too?
Right.
So that's what we did. So we thought about all sorts of different ideas and ways to make it better. And it was an evolution. There were lots of different aspects that sort of came and went as we kind of worked through the model. But basically the idea is that you have a platform that patients are able to go on, find a doctor based on specialty, book an appointment with that doctor very easily, and in one sort of step, kind of like.
Well, and the underlying idea is, I mean, one of the things that I like about it is, like, I have a doctor in the family, right? You're my doctor, and so if I ever have a problem, I go to you and I say, who should I go? I could see you, but if I need to go to a specialist, who's the best? Who would you go to? Who would you send me to?
Right.
And I could also call you at midnight, but I like those elements of having a doctor in the family.
Right.
And so it feels like you were working to replicate that relationship.
Right. And that's our motto, like having a doctor in the family.
Right. So meaning everything, in order to get on the site,
the doctor has to be recommended by another doctor.
Right.
So there's a higher level of quality that's baked into the system in that it's not just come one, come all. Anybody who wants can join, just
Right.
have to pay your money.
Right.
But you are invited to join the system by virtue of the fact that other doctors want to send you patients and
Right.
trust you with their friends, their family, and their patients of their own.
Right.
So see any doctors on the site. These are doctors that have been recommended by other doctors.
Right.
And one of the features that you're talking about, which is cool, is that each doctor has a profile on Qwell and can list other doctors and other specialties that they like to send patients to.
Right.
And so their patients can go on their profile page and find those doctors. If you want to know what, let's say, dermatologist I would send to, you can go on my profile page on Qwell, and you can see the dermatologists I like to send patients to.
Right.
It could be more than one. It could be
So
two
I don't
or
need.
three.
So if I don't have an insurance plan that requires that you give me a referral,
Right.
I don't have to even bother you. I could just go look at it.
Right. You don't have to call my office.
Right.
You don't have to text me. I
Right.
mean, you probably would anyway.
I would.
But you can just go online and find it.
Right.
Obviously, it's not meant to replace. If you need a referral,
Right.
then that just would have to
Right.
be done.
Right.
So that's one aspect
Right.
of the system. So the platform, the idea was to use the platform, this booking platform,
Right.
to not only allow patients to book with doctors, but to allow doctors to book with other doctors.
Right.
So that if I have a patient in my room who I would like to see a particular specialist, I can book an appointment for that patient with the specialist while they're in my office.
Right.
And that's a new idea that doesn't exist at this time.
Well, you were describing to me the time when you needed to refer someone, and you literally went on the computer and you go, okay, so I'm going to refer you to this person. Is that good? It's in your neighborhood. It's someone
Right.
that I would recommend. How's 10:30 a.m. for an appointment tomorrow?
Right.
Right. And they were like, wow, that's awesome.
It's
Yeah,
really
that's
cool.
great.
Yeah,
and
they loved
like
it.
they
loved it.
right.
Like patients love it.
Right,
Patients
right,
love it.
right.
Because how does the system work today? I want to send you to someone. I give you a slip of paper.
Right.
I send you off.
Right.
And 60% of the time, according to the data that's available, 60% of the time, you don't end up in that other doctor's office for whatever reason.
Right.
So there are a lot of problems with that.
Right.
First of
Is
all,
that the actual statistic?
That is. And, there are a lot of problems. I mean,
Right.
first of all, that's a lot of lost visits for the specialists.
Right.
That's, if I want you to see another doctor,
There's a reason.
there's a reason why. And
Right.
so if you don't go and see that doctor, that's bad for me.
Right.
It's bad for you.
Right.
It's
right.
bad for him. I mean, it's not really good for anybody.
Right.
Unless you never really need to see the
Right.
doctor in the first
Right.
place.
Well, no, it's
which hopefully
also
is not the
behavioral
case.
economics, which is that if you, it's like what I always say, which is that if you want to make a change, rather than train or develop, or you create an environment that makes it more likely that you're going to follow through.
Right.
So actually, literally, by the time you leave an office, having an appointment in your calendar for what you're going to do next
Right.
is, and if you decide, there's a lot of research that says if you decide when and where you're going to do something, you're much more likely to do it. They did this research where they had women do breast cancer checks, self-check there for breast cancer. Sometime during the next month, 53% of them did it.
Right.
Tell me when and where in the next month you're going to do it, 100% of them did it.
Right.
So like if you decide when and where you're going to do something, chances are you're going to actually do it.
Right.
That's
So
interesting.
right. So that's one element of the
Right.
system. So we were able to go to other doctors who we knew were in the
Right.
same position as us,
Right.
and we can say, okay, we have a system. It's very similar, but has a lot of differences.
Right.
It's cheaper. It makes you less reliant on that other system, which,
Right.
believe me, is a good thing,
Right.
to be less reliant on one system. It is a little bit higher quality because there's an element of curation that goes into the system.
Right.
And it has this whole other channel for patient flow, which is from one doctor to another, not just from the internet to the
Right.
doctor
Right.
himself. So really, there are a lot of advantages to it, and we developed it. The whole process of really like diving into the startup world and hiring programmers.
Yes, I want to talk. We have to wrap up here, but I want to just briefly talk about that element, right?
Yeah.
Which is like you're taking a huge risk and you're stepping into a world that you know nothing about again,
Right.
right? So, and you're finding out stuff sometimes the hard way,
Right.
like you're making mistakes.
Well,
and-
that has been an incredibly fun adventure. It
Right.
has been, and Rachel is the CEO of the company, and she's
Right.
doing this full time now.
right,
I cut back to half time seeing patients, and the other half I'm doing this. And really, when I'm seeing patients, I'm sort of doing this too because I am sort of using the system every single day.
right,
and looking for bugs and seeing how patients like it, seeing how other doctors like it.
Right.
And we've had a lot of success. I mean, we only launched on July 1st,
Right.
so it's only been a month, but we've so far have more than 70 doctors on the system, and we're using it every single day, and it's working really great. And we're getting great response from people. But like the whole process of learning about computer programming and working with programmers, working with PR marketing people.
And how much do you know about programming?
Zero.
Right.
I know nothing about.
So how do you know you're hiring the right programmers? How do you know you're like?
What
how do you know you're not throwing money away?
Because we have like where we're spending a lot of money on it, but I mean was more expensive than we ever thought.
Right.
The tech development part.
Right.
But we love our developers, and we are very happy with how that's been going.
Right.
So I mean, the proof is in the pudding. It's not like really your opinion so much of if
there's
if
clear
they're able to
measurables
build
that
the system and give you realistic expectations, and the system works, and you understand that there are going to be bugs, and the bugs are fixed in a reasonable amount of time, then you're happy.
So one of the reasons why I like having this conversation with you now, and maybe we'll have a conversation again in a year or so, or 6 months or something as this thing progresses, but because you're in the middle of your risk right now.
Right.
Like you've put a bunch of money in, you put a ton of energy and effort in, you built the system, you're talking to people about it, you're bringing doctors on, you're bringing on investors. Like, I kind of want to ask you just what it feels like to be in this moment in time. Like, you've done a lot, you brought it to market in an incredibly short amount of time. Right? Like you had to, because you had a timeline where, I mean, it was like, again, so let's add this to the favor that this other company did for you, which is there was a cutoff date at which you would have to start paying a ton of money. And so that was the date at which you were working backwards from.
And a lot of other people were working
backwards
too. Yeah.
So you brought it very, very quickly. I'm kind of curious if you take a minute to just go like, how does it feel right now in this moment? To like be really like, maybe you're less in the risk than you were 2 months ago when you didn't have a product. Like now you have a product and it works, and people are buying it, right? People are signing up for it and involved in it, engaged with it. But like, how does it feel to be in that risk?
It feels really exciting. It's a little bit scary because now we're taking other people's money.
Right.
And these are people.
Is this the first time you've taken other people's
money?
money?
We've never really had to raise money in a serious way from other people.
Right.
And it's definitely an acquired skill.
Right.
I mean, it's not something that comes naturally to either one of us.
Right.
Because Rachel and I are a great couple because we have extremely complementary skills in most areas. But in this particular case, neither one of us are sort of like natural fundraiser types. So,
and what about the fundraising? Just name one or two things about the fundraising.
It's just very hard to ask people for money, people that you know, because you have to.
And you're doing right now friends and family.
We're doing friends and family, so it's mostly people that we know. We truly believe that as long as they understand the risks, we're offering an opportunity.
Right.
We're not sort of asking people to give us money as a favor, and we wouldn't want anybody to do that. We wouldn't want money as a favor. But on the other hand, you're still having to ask for money, so it's like it's not easy fundraising. But if you truly believe that you're giving them an opportunity, and if they truly believe they're going into it with eyes open, because the risk, of course, is huge, and that you have skin in the game that's like greater than any of them. Then it makes it easier. But it doesn't sort of, it's still a learning process. It's still a learning curve.
I'm curious if it increases your, or if it changes in any way your like need for this to be successful. Like, I don't know if I'm asking this question right, but if it's like, if you feel more pressure to make this succeed or less, or it's the same. I mean, you have a lot of your money in it anyway.
Yeah,
but
no,
like,
I think it's the same. I think we are as committed as you can possibly be anyway, as you can possibly be to sort of do what we need to do in order to make it successful. So
because it's interesting because you're doing really something that's industry wide, but also something you need for your business. Like your business needs this. So it's like you're creating a product
Right.
that you absolutely need, and then you're opening it up for other people to use too.
Although it is interesting that I'll share with you that, I mean,
just with me.
Over,
this is just between you and
just
me.
between you and me. That over 50% of our patients
right.
were flowing through that other system.
Right.
And so we stood to we were thinking, well, is that the number of patients that we're going to lose?
Right.
In reality, we only really are down about 10%.
Right, that's interesting.
Which means that
somehow those patients are still
somehow those
you.
patients maybe were
New
actually our patients all
They
along.
were actually your patients.
All along.
Right, right.
So, shocker.
Right. Right.
So,
which goes back to also the
which
point,
is sort of an interesting thing. But now, I mean, we are.
Which also, by the way, goes to the point, which is even while you're running this new business, you can't slack in any way on you see this in organizations all the time where there's a business almost becomes a legacy business because that's like the cash cow business, and this is the other business is the risk, and you can lose attention on this business in order to focus on that other business. You can't afford to lose.
Well, not only that, but the synergies
medicine.
Are incredible between those two. I mean, there really are in many ways just like a perfectly they're completely separate businesses, but very totally synergistic. Yeah. So I don't think that wouldn't happen. It's not like our attention is focused on one to the exclusion of the other. It's all sort of very much connected.
Right.
But I think I was going to say that what's very sort of strong motivator for both of us is that we're excited to be doing something new and something that we think is really going to benefit other doctors.
Right.
You know, because one of our other mottos is it's by doctors for doctors. Right. And that's also something that doesn't exist in a lot of areas. You know,
and it also comes back to your personal thing, which is, you went into family practice because you kind of like the doctors. Like you kind of want to be in a community of people that you really enjoy
doctors.
With. Yeah, you like doctors.
I like doctors. And I feel like in so many areas of medicine, doctors are getting squeezed from all sides. Right. And so we're excited to be sort of offering an alternative to them that they can benefit from. And we're excited to sort of design it in the way that we know they would like, because we are them. Right. We know this industry inside and out. We've been practicing in it for, more than 10 years. Right. So we know what's frustrating. We know what's fun.
You've been practicing it for
as in private practice.
Right.
I mean, in private practice, more than 10 years. Right. So we know it inside and out, and it's fun to be able to design a system where we know sort of exactly what's good about it and what needs to be improved.
Right. Any final thoughts, any final learnings that you have, or we're talking to an audience, we're talking in front of an audience who are very focused on leadership and very focused on these themes that we've been talking about taking risks and finding opportunities and pursuing them and kind of facing the possibilities of failure or obstacles that you have to kind of get around. Like all of these themes are the themes that leaders and organizations focus on all the time. Any final thoughts?
I think, well, one thought I have is that I feel that the context that you're operating in, the partners that you have, the social circles that you're in, really are a big determinant to success. At least I think for us. I for sure would not be doing this without Rachel. Right. She might be doing this without me, but I would not be doing this without her. And neither one of us would be doing this without you and Anthony, our other brother, and all the other friends and family that we have that we're able to draw on. Right. So it's like that cliche of I'm not even going to use that. It takes a village cliche, but it does remind me of something that Obama had said, which is for successful business to work like, great, you did a successful business, and this is far from successful. I'm not putting myself in this category yet. One day maybe, but not yet. But for a successful business to happen, the roads have to be built, and the lights have to work, and there has to be police, and there has to be security, and there has to be a lot of other things in place. So, these are privileges that we have that I don't think it would be realistic to expect we could be doing something like this without them.
and the myth of like the solo entrepreneur who
Right.
breaks out and independently, like that's actually a myth. Like you feel the support of people around you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's a myth. On the one hand, you do need to have. I feel like you need to have, a
drive,
tremendous
like,
amount
amount
of
of
like
independent drive.
motivation
Yeah.
and persistence.
Right.
But you also need to have the right environment to be working in.
Right. Right.
So we're lucky enough to have that.
Well, thank you. We're talking with Dr. Bertie Bregman, my brother, and who's started a medical practice and opened up a bunch of offices, and now has started
With
Qwell with Rachel Bregman, who is with their 5 kids at this point. Right?
Yeah.
Right. This is we're recording this
Now
late in the
people are really
evening.
going to think we're crazy.
Yeah. Right.
5 kids.
Well, it's you've done a good job in all of it.
Thank
So thank you so much for being on the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure.